From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. In Argentina, for the 8th time, Congress will debate a bill to decriminalize abortion. This year's legislation proposes that women have access to legal, safe, and publicly funded abortions within the first 14 weeks of pregnancy. We were joined earlier by journalist Seaga from Argentina to talk about this bill.
One of the main modifications regarding the previous project that was presented last year and was debated in the Congress last year and was not passed is that sexual education is considered in the bill, and also that the period between a woman or a person asked for the abortion is going to be contemplated in the law. That is that 5 days is the maximum period of time until women can get the abortion. I think that today the social penalization against abortion is just a question of the past. People is thinking that abortion have to be a right for women and all people that have the ability to get pregnant. So this is an important advance in the streets for the cause, and I think that sooner or later we are going to have a law for abortion in Argentina.
Venezuela has taken up the temporary presidency of the United Nations Commissions on Disarmament. Ambassador Jorge Valero accepted the position at a meeting of the commission in Geneva. He said Venezuela would use its presidency to address the alarming nuclear threat that hangs over the world, and he lamented that the United States has isolated itself by having its delegation walk out of the session. Other diplomats also accused the U.S. of undermining the unilateral system. The Cuban foreign minister has arrived in China for an official visit. Minister Bruno Rodriguez was greeted by his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi after his arrival to Beijing. The visit is set to strengthen cooperation ties as both leaders will discuss issues related to their diplomatic and economic relationships. Rodriguez will be in China until Thursday, May 30th. The Colombian Congress took on the debate of the growing cases of social leaders being killed. The FARC party brought up the discussion on the implementation of the peace agreement, which was signed in 2016. The High Commissioner for Peace, the Ministry of Interior, and members of the Attorney General's office were part of the debate. The party demanded the government of Iván Duque to stop the long list of murders in the country. In a letter, they also demanded the liberation of peace negotiator Jesus Santrich, who is still under arrest even after a court ordered his release.
All the time that goes by without the government implementing the Havana Agreement, we unfortunately have to measure it in number of deaths.
It is no coincidence that the government has announced the destruction of the peace agreement, and it becomes headlines around the world. I say this with shame, as we are seeing a new wave of security policies that left more than 5,000 civilians dead in the past.
Colombia's Council of State has ratified former FARC leader Jesus Santrich's seat in Congress. This came after the leadership of the House of Representatives presented an appeal to remove him from his position. The reason for the appeal was that Santrich did not attend the swearing-in ceremony. However, the Council of State agreed that he could not attend because he was in jail. Santrich remains in prison after being momentarily freed on May 17th before being arrested minutes later. The issue of extrajudicial executions is back on the agenda in Colombia after a retired colonel was sentenced to 37 years in prison. Orlando Gomez was found guilty of the murder in 2006 of 2 civilians who he then claimed were guerrillas killed in combat.
For the academic and analyst Boris Duarte, the story of extrajudicial killings in Colombia is not a closed book. He says it's a security policy that the government is implementing once again as it tries to undo the peace process.
They want to limit the demands of society and undermine the most important part of the peace agreements, which is the transitional justice carried out by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, or JEP. And this, just as many soldiers are being called for questioning about extrajudicial executions.
A report by the Attorney General's office records 2,248 victims of extrajudicial killings between 1988 and 2014. It says 514 officers, 992 non-commissioned officers, and 133 civilians took part in these executions. So far, the JEP has summoned about 2,000 soldiers involved in these crimes against humanity.
Many of the victims' families see the JEP as an opportunity to find out who was really responsible for applying this policy, that tried to win the war at any cost. And this is important for the whole country. The JEP needs to be able to continue its work.
Questions have been raised about the new military chiefs appointed by President Duque, most particularly in the case of General Nicasio Martinez, who was described by the New York Times as the architect of a new era of extrajudicial execution. On top of this comes the sentence of 37 years in prison for the retired Colonel Orlando Gomez.
The recent verdict against Colonel Gomez is one more proof that for the government, especially under President Álvaro Uribe, the crimes known as false positives, these extrajudicial killings, were a deliberate policy of the state.
The Committee in Support of Political Prisoners has sent a letter to the Senate committee to demand that the promotion of General Nicasio Martinez be blocked because there is evidence that he was involved in both corruption and extrajudicial executions when he commanded the 10th Brigade of the Army's 1st Division between 2004 and 2006.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Brazilian government has announced increased security measures in the country's prisons after dozens of inmates were killed in recent spurts of violence. The Justice and Public Security Ministries also announced that 9 inmates who are responsible for the massacre will be transferred to other prisons. At least 55 people died due to the clashes between criminal groups in different jails on both Sunday and Monday. A U.S. company has started building the first section of a private border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. The company called We Build the Wall was created by a war veteran and collected millions of dollars in private donations through an online campaign to fund the project. Advisors of the company are led by Steve Bannon, a far-right strategist and former advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump. It is not yet clear whether this project has been approved by the U.S. government.
At the beginning, we thought it was a fence that the U.S. authorities were building in various spots of the border, and we proceeded to ask the U.S. International Boundary and Water Commission about the project, so our commission could revise and approve it. What we found out was the U.S. government hadn't been notified of the construction either.
A recent poll in Nicaragua shows that nearly 60% of the population supports President Daniel Ortega. This comes as the government and the opposition continue trying to find a peaceful solution to the political situation gripping the country. We have more in this report.
The results of the survey carried out by the M&R Palestra shows a clear majority support the government of the Sandinista Front. Some analysts say this is because of the government's social programs.
I have seen all the health programs, the education programs, and the infrastructure. People approve of this because they benefit from them.
81% of those consulted oppose any possibility of a coup d'etat, which some sectors of the opposition have been promoting. Meanwhile, the lawmaker Wilfredo Navarro says they are working on a law to support the victims of the situation created by last year's third coup.
There is a 60% support for the government. This clearly shows that people want peace, they reject violence, they want negotiations. We all want to build a better society, which is strengthened by what our government does. That is why we are presenting these complementary actions.
The study also reveals that for 69.9% of the people of Nicaragua, their main concern is their economy.
Siempre ha sido una preocupación de los nicaragüenses.
The family economy and the personal economy, having a job, that the cost of basic needs being in line with my income. These have always been the main concern for Nicaraguans, and that is still the case. People want economic growth to the level it was at before April 18th last year. Because obviously more jobs and an improvement in family income brings tranquility and security.
81% of those interviewed state that calling strikes and protests damages the economy and jobs, while 78.5% believe that economic recovery should be prioritized at talks between government and the opposition, even though the latter don't seem to want to make progress.
The shadow cast by sanctions is very real for everyone. The opposition are asking for more sanctions and other kinds of intervention. And people know what this means because they lived through that in the 1980s. They know it leads to unemployment, less investment, and economic decline.
Una situación de deterioro económico parejo.
According to Nicaragua's central bank, the attempted coup in 2018 caused a loss of more than 150,000 jobs by the last quarter of the year.
Jamaica's former Prime Minister Edward Seaga has died. Seaga passed away Tuesday on his 89th birthday in the United States, where he had been receiving treatment for cancer. He was the 5th Prime Minister of Jamaica, serving from 1980 to 1989, and was the leader of the Jamaica Labour Party up until 2005. The former Prime Minister is credited with building Jamaica's post-independence, cultural, and financial sectors. Seaga was also the last surviving framer of Jamaica's constitution. Here's a taste of him speaking in his last election campaign in 2002.
I have one firm belief that the best way to deal with corruption is to set the example at the top. When you set the example at the top, the water that flows from the top is pure and clean, and it will carry whatever dirt is in the way.
Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holmes paid tribute to Seaga on his passing, describing the former PM as his mentor. Holmes tweeted, "I consider Mr. Seaga my political father. He has been a great mentor, friend, and guide in imparting the skills on strategic leadership and in building a nation. I owe him, and indeed Jamaica owes him, a debt of gratitude. He will forever remain in our hearts and mind." St. Lucia's Prime Minister Alan Chesney is announcing a decline in the island's unemployment figures from 22% to 16%. Youth unemployment has seen a 13% drop. Chesney said tax strategies are working to reduce unemployment.
So people said, well, when you reduce the VAT rate from 15% to 12.5%, the projection even by the IMF was that we were going to lose revenue of $55 million. Well, the first year we only lost revenue of $15 million, and by last year we already had recovered that entire amount of money. But what I was explaining was it was not just the VAT tax. By reducing the VAT tax, what it did, it encouraged people to open up businesses, but more importantly, we argued this point that the money that we saved on VAT would either be passed to the consumer in the reduction of cost of products, and when you look at the VAT, when you look at the inflation rate, some of that happened. But even if the businesses kept that difference, it would improve their bottom line.
In Haiti, the formation of a government has come to a temporary halt due to disagreements between legislators and the executive power. Four opposition senators prevented the validation of the cabinet on Monday after two failed ratification sessions. Although President Jovenel Moïse has the support of the majority bloc, 13 lawmakers rejected the appointment of 8 ministers from the previous government, demanding changes to the cabinet. Meanwhile, the local currency continues to plummet as the international community has halted budget support. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has met with representatives of the Afghan government and the Taliban in Moscow on Tuesday. The meeting was held in Moscow ahead of a conference on the anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and Afghanistan. The conference marks a century of diplomatic relations between both countries.
Russia is convinced that the conflict in Afghanistan does not have a military solution. The only possible resolution is to achieve peace through political and diplomatic process. We are for the complete withdrawal of foreign forces from the country. We call up all the sides in Afghanistan to start negotiations as soon as possible with participation of a wide range of social and political forces. At the same time, we confirm that we adhere to the Principle 1, an undivided Afghan state, in which numerous ethnic groups live in peace and accord.
The Muslim Council of Britain has lodged a complaint with the Equality and Human Rights Commission over alleged Islamophobia within the Conservative Party. A statement by the council said there's an unprecedented number of cases regarding a culture of Islamophobia in the party. The council is Britain's largest Muslim body, represented over 500 member organizations. European Union leaders and representatives are meeting for a special summit in Brussels. Our correspondent, Eduardo Marin, has the details.
Leaders from the EU countries are expected to arrive to Brussels to have a special summit in which they are going to analyze the results of the recently European Parliament elections and also to start the process of designation of the top positions of the European Union institutions. According to Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, the allocation of positions is set to be concluded in June. EU leaders started arriving in Brussels on Monday evening. On the same evening, Spanish President Pedro Sánchez and French President Emmanuel Macron had dinner in Paris, in which they discussed the formation of an alliance between Social Democrats and Liberals, a progressive alliance, to take the power from the Popular European Party. For the first time in 40 years, the main center-right and center-left alliances failed to get an absolute majority, and due to this, Social Democrats are considering forming an alliance with the Liberals. The objective is to reduce the power the Popular European Party will have on the European Commission and to stop the rise of the far right. Several meetings are scheduled to be held between the leaders of Belgium, Netherlands, and Portugal.
We thank Edu for that report. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Democratic Republic of Congo has banned the use of wooden passenger boats that are more than 5 years old after 45 people died when an overcrowded boat sank on Lake Mai-Ndombe on a Saturday. About 200 passengers from the overcrowded boat remain missing. The country sees frequent boat accidents on its waterways, which are a popular means of transport across the country. More than 800,000 people are to be vaccinated against cholera in the DRC. According to the World Health Organization, at least 240 deaths and more than 10,000 cases have been recorded since January of this year. The rollout of the vaccination campaign is meant to contain the unprecedented epidemic witnessed in North Kivu. Police in Algeria have blocked access to the 14th anti-government demonstration by students and teachers. The protesters marched to reaffirm their rejection of presidential elections scheduled for July 4th. A cordon of police blocked their way to the Martyrs Square, forcing protesters back to the iconic Central Post Office.
We have mobilized in Algiers despite the intimidation of police forces that wanted to push us back. We showed our determination as a response.
Protests have continued in Sudan as a deadlock on talks between strike leaders and the military persist. Protesters held posters and shouted slogans in Khartoum as they began a national strike to mount pressure on the military to hand power to a civilian administration. On Monday, the Alliance for Freedom and Change announced its call to stage a two-day general strike. Army generals seized the power in the country after ousting President Omar al-Bashir. Somalia has been affected by a severe drought that threatens to be worse than the pre-famine conditions of 2016. The country received below-average rains while still recovering from the impact of a previous drought. According to humanitarian organizations, by the end of this year, almost 1 million children are anticipated to be malnourished. Almost 2 million people face acute food insecurity, and more than double of 2017. The price of fruits and vegetables levels have started rising in the past few weeks, with the UN warning conditions are likely to cause a major humanitarian crisis.
Fruits and vegetables are very expensive since Ramadan month has started. Even before Ramadan, they were expensive, but now it's becoming very expensive as day goes by. I think the price is rising because of the lack of rains or rain delay. Besides, harvesting time is delayed. However, the rain started and we hope that the price will start falling soon.
Temporary shelters have been set up for survivors of Cyclone Idai in Malawi after thousands of people were left homeless by the disaster. Malawi's Red Cross Society built homes for those displaced by the cyclone, which left a trail of deaths and massive destruction.
The effects in Malawi were quite devastating. More than 800,000 people were affected. We have about 86,000 of them displaced, 60 deaths, about 600 and something injuries. And for Malawi, this is big, given the serious socio-economic challenges that the country faces on its own.
It's been 2 months since Cyclone Idai wreaked havoc in Mozambique, with survivors still struggling to rebuild their lives. Rural communities are trying to rehabilitate farmlands and reboot food production in a country where 80% of the population depends on agriculture. Our correspondent Andre Vieira went to see how the recovery is processing. This is the first in his series of reports.
From overhead, it is still possible to see the damage caused in the city of Beira, in the Sofala province. On the evening of March 14th, Idai made landfall over the central region, producing torrential rains, floods and strong winds, which left about 600 people dead. It is an experience residents of Beira will never forget.
The storm made landfall at around 7 p.m. The wind speed rapidly intensified. Just 1 hour later, the storm's intensity grew. By 9 p.m., the roof of the bank was blown off. It just flew away, as if lifted by giant hands. Then the cyclone struck with deadly force.
The true scale of devastation and flooding still lingers in Beira's popular tourist area. We toured the city and the rickshaw driven by Armando Jose. He has seen the damage firsthand. That's because this city is his home. But he's become a statistic, one of the nearly 87,000 displaced. He now shares a 15 square meter flat with the rest of his family.
For me, being the only man in the house, it's difficult to start all over again. It's like starting all over from scratch without knowing how to.
Moving away from the coast and getting closer inland, you can see that roadways are still damaged and many people still live in shelters or improvised housing. About 180 miles away from Beira is Chibabuara. The community heavily relies on agriculture for its survival. But the cyclone has destroyed roadways, homes, crops and their lives.
On that day, I was inside my house. Suddenly it came crashing down on me, and I had to run out. When I managed to get outside, I saw trees and corn crops obliterated. What's even worse is that after the storm was over, we all had to battle malaria and other illnesses.
The cyclones have deepened Mozambique's food crisis. Many farmers are left with nothing but hope.
If the rain comes, the first thing we're going to do is plant. That's the basis of agriculture, and that's the only way we can start afresh.
For this country that fought until 1975 for its independence from Portugal, new challenges arise after Idai. While the immediate future is concerning, the people of Mozambique are determined to rebuild their communities and reclaim their lives.
And lastly, a team of rafters made up of former guerrillas from the FARC in Colombia has won a prize in Australia. The one-time combatants exchanged their guns for paddles following the signing of Colombia's peace agreement in 2016. After taking part in the tournament in Queensland, the International Rafting Federation awarded the FARC team a special recognition as an initiative for peace. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.